And let's see, we'll go for a little bit. I think I studied all the way down to like verse 9 or 10. And so I don't think we'll get that far tonight. But in chapter 16 here, we cross over into the ugly thing that happens. the thing between Hagar and Sarah and Abraham here in this. And it just is an ugly thing that should never have happened. But it's something that has messed up all of history. If you and you'll know what I'm talking about once we get going here. But this chapter didn't have to happen, but in the way we like to help God out. God gives a promise, and we just think we got to get in the way, and we wind up making a mess instead of following and being patient with the Lord. Well, the thing about it is God works everything out for good to them that love Him. And thank God for that promise. But there is a real doozy of a mistake here. Verse 1, now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. So automatically you know what's fixing to happen. And Sarai said unto Abram, behold, now the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian. Now notice how detailed God is here. He says, and Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. And so here in verse 1, Abram's wife could bear Abram no children. She knew that, she understood that, she accepted it. And yet, God had given Abram this promise that through him, his seed would go on and inherit the land. And so Sarai could bear no children. They had acquired a handmaiden from Egypt. And of course, her name is Hagar. She attends to the needs of Sarai. Now remember that Pharaoh had given them slaves back in chapter 12 when they had gone down into Egypt. And so at that time is where Sarai obtained Hagar. Probably when Pharaoh took her, Hagar was given to her right then as her handmaiden to get her ready probably for the wedding ceremony. And so after that whole ordeal, and she was revealed to be another man's wife, Pharaoh was generous enough to let her keep Hagar. And remember, we had said that Hagar might have been a king's daughter. We're not sure, probably not. But some scholars say that she was probably the Pharaoh's daughter. I don't hold to that because I don't think that Pharaoh would have given his own daughter as a handmaiden to Abram or to Sarah. So anyway, that's how they obtained Hagar, and it may have been the time that Lot got his wife also, and a lot of problems happened from that. Now the name Hagar means flight. It means flight. So Sarai is about 76 years old here because she's 10 years younger than Abram. Look at chapter 16, verse 16. It says, and Abram was 80, which is 80, and 6 years, so 86 years old, when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram. And so that means that right here, probably she is either 75 or 76 years old. She's 10 years younger than Abram. And so now, to be quite honest, whether she's 75 or 76 years old, that's pretty old to be bearing children. Right? Right, ladies? And what lady wants to bear children when you're 75, 76 years old? Nobody. But Sarai automatically makes an assumption here what God's will is, which we know is very dangerous. When we start assuming, it's very dangerous to assume what God's will is. And a lot of times it gets us into trouble when we assume. But she says here in verse 2, notice she says, I pray thee. I pray thee. So this is a plead for her who cannot bear children to have a wife that can bear children, which she would then raise. And that was a custom back then. If they were, obviously, this thing didn't just come out of nowhere, but so it had to be some kind of a custom of some kind that allows this thing to happen. If not, then it came from Egypt. This mentality did. It's an Egyptian mentality or a Babylonian mentality. Remember, they came out of Babylon, where Nimrod and Semiramis came from. And Terah, being the captain of Nimrod's host, this could have a profound, that could be where this custom came from. Could have a profound involvement and influence upon Abram and Sarai during this time. And so when she's pleading for Abram to take Hagar as his wife, now notice he doesn't just go into her, she is given as Abram's wife. Did you notice that? So there's in the sight of God, everything's done correctly. All right? And so it's pretty, and I guess this is why Abram's going to fall for it. He's going to fall for it. Now, it's pretty hard to say no to your wife when she is pleading you to do something, right, men? If she's begging you and beseeching you, you're going to take extra thought and to take notice of what she's actually going to say, and it's going to be harder to say no to her. At least it is in my household. Now, when she just asks, I can easily say no. I don't have a problem with it. Much like you men, right? But if she's saying, I beg you and I plead for you, you're going to take extra thought, and you might fall for it. Amen? I mean, she's pleading with you and saying, oh, you're such a great husband, and butter you up a little bit so you'll say yes. Right, ladies? Isn't that how you do it? See, us men know a little bit. And so you ladies are smiling. You know it. That's right. And so, but it's hard for us men to say no when the wife is pleading and begging you to do something. And not only that, Sarai knows that she's 76 years old. She's come to the conclusion that she'll never bear children. So Sarai pleads Hammurabi's code. Now, we talked about Hammurabi, and so what is it? Let me pull this up here. It's very interesting, actually, what this code is. Let me see here. I'm trying to find it. Okay, so here's section 146 of the Code of Hammurabi, and it concerns the rights and status of a maidservant who has borne children for a man at his wife's direction. So if Nimrod was Hammurabi, and we kind of showed that he probably was not, Hammurabi at this time was around somewhere, coming up with this code. And so this code, that's what it's the rights and status of a maidservant who's borne children for a man at his wife's direction. And so it's a protection. Now notice this. According to this code, this is a protection from being sold. if she bears children to Abram, she cannot be sold because she has his child. And so, of course, Hagar has nothing to say about it. But what Sarai is doing is saying, okay, if we do this, then there's no way she can be sold then. That was the law of the day. Also, there's a status reduction. The maidservant can, however, be kept as a slave, and her status will be reduced or kept among the other maidservants. Some translations specify giving her a slave's hairstyle as a mark of the status, as a female servant. And so the law stipulates that if a man takes a wife and she gives him a maidservant for the purpose of bearing children, that the maidservant subsequently has children, she is granted a certain level of protection, and it's a protection of being sold. So this is a very interesting thing that Sarai is pleading with Abram about. And it locks Hagar in as a servant. And so now Abram is definitely wrong in hearkening to Sarai in this situation. Now, no doubt Hagar was a lot younger than Sarai. Most likely she's a lot younger, and Abram doesn't even think twice about it. I mean, he hearkens to her, and that's why we have such a problem with older men marrying younger women half their age today in American society anymore. And so, but Abram doesn't consult God about this thing. And this has a severe reaction to it. And the evidence that shows clearly the error here is the fact that up until now, the Lord has been speaking to Abram regularly. I mean, all through chapter 15, now the word of the Lord came to Abram. Now the word of the Lord shows up. And I mean, Abram is walking with the Lord. And up to now, he's been speaking to Abram regularly and revealing himself in a number of ways to Abram. And all of a sudden, the word of the Lord stops and it drops out of the text. I mean, this has a profound effect on Abram's relationship with the Lord. Now, although the angel speaks to Hagar later in chapter 16, verse 7, the Lord does not speak to Abram until 13 years after the birth of Ishmael. Look at chapter 16, verse 6. But Abram said to Sarai, behold, thy maid is in thy hand, do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarai dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. So see how it's treated. Now look at 17:1. Now, 6:16 says that he was 86 years old. Verse 1 of chapter 17 says, and when Abram was 90 years old and 9. See the time lapse? I mean, the text automatically jumps 13 years in the future. There's a span of 13 years that's not mentioned here in the Bible. And so that's what consequence Abram paid for here. He lost 13 years of the will of God. Now, one cannot blame Sarai for a woman of 76 doesn't have much hope of mothering a group of people as large as the stars of heaven. Right? I mean, that's what God promised him. So how is God going to bring this to Sarai? Now, we look at the story and we say, we can automatically say, oh, she should have trusted God. But wait a minute. If you ladies put yourself in Sarai's shoes, you wouldn't be expecting children either. Abram, I don't know, after he bears a child through Hagar, he knows he can have children at 86 years old, but she thinks she's done. So that's why this thing happens here. And so also at this time, Sarai had no revelation that she was to be the mother of Abram's seed. God never said it's coming through Sarai. God never said that. If you check chapter 15, 1-4, it doesn't say that. It's just supposed to come through Abram. So if she desired to see his promise come to pass, then Hagar seemed to be the logical choice, if you're to look at it. But on the other hand, how many women are going to raise their hand and say, wow, that's a great idea? Not one of you ladies would say that. You say, well, that's horrible advice. That's one of the worst mistakes possible. And one of you ladies would volunteer your husband to do something like this. No one wants to share their spouse. And so this is a horrible thing that happens. And verse chapter 16, verse 2, the second part, she says, I pray thee go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. So he listened to her. Just like Adam hearkened to the voice of Eve. Look back real quick at Genesis chapter 3 and verse 17. Look what God said to Adam. Genesis chapter 3, verse 17, and unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. So he hearkened to her. And so you see here that a little bit of human history being repeated. Just like Adam hearkened to his voice, hearkens unto the voice of his wife, so does Abram. Now, it doesn't mean that we should never listen to our wife. Amen? That's not, because later God tells Abram to listen to Sarai. So there are times but when we listen to our wife, we should put a little prayer toward it and say, Lord, is this the right decision? We should ask the Lord if it's right. And Abram didn't do that. Neither did Adam, by the way. And so, not that you ladies are always wrong. I'm not saying that either. Okay? Most of the time, I said most of the time, you're right. Okay? to be very honest. Most of the time, you're right. But we see a little bit of human history being repeated. And what men learn from history is that mankind never learns anything from history. And the saying goes on, and if you don't learn from history, then what happens? You will repeat history. That's just the bottom line. And so the human patterns of mankind's nature comes out once again. And that's how now listen, this is how you can predict what's going to happen in the future. All right? Why? You say, what's going to happen in our land in 5, 10, 15 years from now? The same thing that's happened in the history of other nations. Why? Because man never learns from history. That's why men like Yuval Noah Harari can write a book and prophesy 21 things for the 21st century. Why? All he has to do is give a broad description of what's going to happen in the future and be as vague as possible. And why? Because they're looking at the past things in history, and man always falls into the same trap of mankind. And so that's why we can predict what's going to happen next year by looking at what has previously happened in history the last few years. It's that easy. And so verse 3, and Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. Now remember, Abram had come out of his father's house at 75. So if he's dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, he's going to be 85 years old here. Isn't that right? And so God puts those little details so you can know the timeline where this falls at. And so 9 months later, That's going to put Abram at 86 years old by the time Ishmael's born. And so, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. So Hagar is given to Abram to be his wife. So Sarai gives Hagar, her servant, to Abram, and she becomes his wife. And this is done without a ceremony of any kind, without any license, without any exchanging of rings or exchanging of vows. There's no family members present on her side or Abram's side. There's no preacher, no justice of the peace, nothing. She's just given it to be his wife, and she's understood to be his wife. And verse 4, and he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. So notice here, this is the first record of a man having two wives since Cain's descendants. Remember, one of Cain's had two wives. Lamech had two wives, of which Tubal and Jabal were sons, and the other one was Tubal Cain. Cain's descendants, he had two wives. This is the first time that we know of. Now, it is possible that Terah might have had two wives. We're not sure. But Sarai came from one, and Abram came from another, and they married, remember. So it's possible, but the Bible doesn't specifically say. We deduce Terah might have had two wives. I mean, Abram's wife could have died, and he might have married again. We don't know. But we do know for sure Abram has two wives here now. And this sets the stage for Jacob having four wives later, right? Because Jacob does the same thing Abram does. He has two wives, and each one of them gives their maid to Jacob. And that you have the 12 tribes of Israel that come from that. So obviously here Hagar gets pregnant immediately. But and now notice family squabbles start. Isn't that something? This is what happens when you have multiple wives. One is despised, and one gets more attention. And the one that gets more attention is the one that can bear children. We went through this already in 1 Samuel with Hannah and Peninnah, remember. Hannah was the mother of Samuel. And Peninnah made fun of Hannah because she could bear children and Hannah couldn't. Same thing right here. Hagar can have children, and she despises her own mistress, Sarai. Now, remember Rachel and Leah? Remember the family squabbles over that whole ordeal? And theirs is twice as bad. That involved four wives, and every one of those wives had children. So that was twice as bad as this one here. And so Mormons that practice polygamy have lots of problems. I mean, just ask Cody Brown and his sister wives, which, by the way, he's just for this, because this has been on old national TV. There's like 10 seasons of called Sister Wives. He had 5 wives, and he's married to one of them now. They all divorced him. You talk about problems. That's because one felt one gets more attention than the others do. And that's what it boiled down to. And so Sarai feels disrespected here because of Hagar. Hagar probably figures that she's better than Sarai because she can bear children and Sarai can't. So off in the distance, she's snickering and talking, and Sarai is really upset because she knows what's being said. Maybe she's overheard a conversation or two. And so now this also proves that Sarai is the one who can't have children. It's not Abram. Obviously, Abram can have children, so the problem is with Sarai here. Now, that whole thing has remained unproven because he only had one wife up until now. And back then, there were no kind of experiments so they could see which one has the problem. All right? But here, it's not Abram, it is Sarai. And so now God already alluded to that in chapter 11, if you remember. And so God already knew way beforehand that Sarai had the problem and couldn't bear children. And so, but it's proven here. So Hagar feels that she has reason to brag about the matter, like Peninnah did in 1 Samuel chapter 1. She does not fail to give her mistress superior smiles, and she renders a mock humility when obeying orders. Now think about it. Hagar is able to have children, and so she's got to obey Sarai's orders, but it's a mock humility. She has to do it because it's her duty. She's the maid. She's the slave. And so this is plainly illustrated in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 2, 4 through 6, and verse 8. All found in 1 Samuel 1. Exactly what happened there is no doubt what happens here in Genesis chapter 16. Now, verse 5, and Sarai said unto Abram, my wrong be upon thee. So Sarai blames Abram. Now, she blames Abram for what she did. But notice Abram takes the blame. He doesn't rebuke her. Well, it's not my fault. You're the one that gave her to me. He doesn't say that. Now, notice that she says, my wrong be upon thee. I have given my maid into thy bosom, and when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and thee. And so now into thy bosom obviously shows the intimacy between Hagar and Abram. Now the idea is, look at my maid. She's sneering at me and laughing at me, and she's disrespecting me, and it's all your fault, Abram. Well, it probably might be. I mean, he could have said no to the thing, right? I mean, he could have. He didn't, but he probably should have. And so she says, the Lord judge between me and thee. And to be honest, this whole thing is a comedy story. It really is comical. I mean, imagine this going on in your household. You know, thank God it's not, right? Right, men? Right, women? Thank God it's not. But it's laughable. But what does the husband do here? Notice, but Abram said to Sarai, no, it's all your fault because it's your idea. He didn't say that, did he? No, look at verse 6. But Abram said to Sarai, behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. Now notice, he doesn't treat Hagar as his wife. Sarai's number one, and although if he would have held to Hagar's side and taken Hagar's side, Sarai would have been despised in Abram's sight too. Abram doesn't do that. Now, I have to say, Abram kind of skirts the issue here and places it back on her in a roundabout way. He said, look, she's your maid. You do what you want with her. Why? It's not like Abram's madly in love with her, right? He still allows Sarai to treat her like a slave, a maid. She's yours. You do to her as what you want. And so now Sarai said before, the Lord judge between me and thee. And that sounds good. That sounds spiritual. But it's much like Rachel's oath. Remember what Rachel said? Give me children lest I die. And Jacob said, am I in God's stead? Who withholdeth fruit from thy womb? I mean, it doesn't mean anything. And Abram just overlooks it. And, you know, it's not a big deal. And so, but verse 6 here, or now, Look at Genesis chapter, well, I think Genesis chapter 30, verse 6 is where Rachel says that to Jacob. Yeah, and Rachel said, God hath judged me and hath also heard my voice and given me a son. Now that's Rachel there. And so, and now Rachel, that's when her handmaid conceived. And so, but notice, all that sounds good and everything, but the Lord doesn't judge Abram for this thing. The Lord judged between me and thee. Well, according to Rachel, that the Lord judged her for the thing. And she named his name Dan, which means judged. It means God judged. And so it doesn't amount to much here. Yeah, God's going to judge the situation. Abram didn't have to say yes to it. He could have said no. But instead of arguing about this situation, now notice, men, notice how this thing comes up. She's ready to fight because she's been despised. And instead of carrying on the argument with her, you see how he dodges the bullet. Boy, you know, I look at that and I say, man, if I had that kind of wisdom. When my wife comes at me and wants to argue about something, that I can just skirt the issue and avoid the whole argument. That's what Abram does here. You know how that takes wisdom to be able to do that. Because the argument was over. He said, although Hagar's his wife now, he says, look, she's your maid. You deal with her however you want. And it's over, and Sarah does. She deals hardly with her. I mean, she's harsh with her. And Hagar, living up to her name, takes flight. And she leaves. And so Abram dodges the situation instead of just sitting there arguing about this situation. Now, notice Abram doesn't go to Hagar and reprimand her for disrespecting Sarai. He tells Sarah to deal with it because it's her maid. And she does. Sarai takes care of it. Abram didn't even say that Sarai was right in the matter or wrong in the matter. It wasn't a matter of right and wrong. You know, men, ladies, when you're in an argument, we think, well, I have to be right. Isn't that right, men? We think we have to. You know, sometimes it's not about being right and wrong. Sometimes it's just a take a step away from it and say, now, I don't have that kind of wisdom. I wish I did. I cause a lot of problems. I get a lot of arguments because of stupid me, you know. And so that comes with age and comes with years. And sometimes it's best not to go there. Sometimes I say, honey, do we want to really go to this and do this tonight? Sometimes she'll come back and say, no, let's not. I said, okay. I've done that before. Sometimes that's the better situation. It's not are you wanting to fight to show that you're right and that I'm wrong? Or vice versa? Is it for the man to show that I'm right and she's wrong? Sometimes it's better to skirt the issue and not even go there. But Abram here has made the final decision when Hagar was offered to him by Sarai. So instead of treating Hagar like a wife, he allows his wife, Sarai, to deal with Hagar like a servant girl, which is exactly what she is. And so now verse 6 again, and when Sarai dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. Sarah had to put her foot down and stop Hagar before it gets worse. You know, that's sometimes, parents, you have to do that with your children. Sometimes it goes too far where you got all of a sudden say, knock it off or we're going to rumble. Sometimes I have to do that with my teenagers. Look, you've gone too far. Knock it off, or we're going to tumble and rumble, and we're going to wrestle it out. And Sarah says, if we let this thing go, it's only going to get worse. And so she has to reprimand hard for it. Now, we don't know what actions make up the hard dealings, but it could be a number of things. It could be a huge chewing out, a lecture with a scolding, or maybe it's a little harsher. I mean, back then, it could come with a whip or something, right? I mean, back then, that's the way servants were treated. And so it could have been harsher. But at any rate, Hagar didn't have a Supreme Court to run to. There were no lawyers available for her to run to like there is today. Do we practice this thing today? No, we don't. We really don't. And so Abram and Sarai was the government back then, if you want to look at it. And so Abraham was king, and you could say that Sarai was queen at this time of the known world. And so Hagar fled from her face. Now verse 7, and we're going to stop it right here, but it says, and the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way to Shur. Now, this is the first mention of the famous angel of the Lord. The angel of the Lord shows up for the first time here in verse 7. And he appears many times in the Bible after this, and is often a theophany, which is a pre-incarnate form of Jesus Christ. He is found as Jehovah in the burning bush in Exodus chapter 3. He wrestles with Jacob. He appears to Abraham in Genesis 18 and 19. In fact, he's already appeared to Abraham, just not as the angel of the Lord. He leads Israel out of Egypt in Exodus 23. He rebukes the nation in apostasy in Jude verse 6. He appears to Manoah and his wife in Judges 13. He rebukes the nation in apostasy in Judges 6, not Jude 6, Judges 6. He appears to Manoah and his wife in Judges 13. He ministers to Elijah in 1 Kings 19. Now, the angel of the Lord is mentioned 200 times or more in the Bible, and is sometimes an angel of the Lord and sometimes the angel of the Lord. Now, not every time, and we went over this Wednesday night, not every time where it says the angel of the Lord is it Jesus Christ in a pre-incarnate form. And now the question is, when the angel of the Lord shows up, is this God the Word, or is it just an angel of the Lord? Well, is he given? Now, here's how you know. Here's how you know whether it's God the Word or just a regular angel. Number one, is he given divine titles? In the context, does it say, and the Lord said, while the angel of the Lord is speaking? Is he given divine titles like God? Number two, is he given divine authority? See? A divine authority of God. Number three, is he given divine powers? Powers of like healing or other different kinds of powers. And number four, is he given a divine commission? Now, sometimes he is sent as a messenger. Sometimes the angel of the Lord shows up as a messenger. Now, well, we're going to answer, and if one of those fits, it is an extra bodily appearance of God the Word. Okay, and as we go through this passage, we're going to bring this out, and we're going to use the divine titles, the divine authority, the divine power, and a divine commission, and find out, is this God or is it just an angel? Okay, and we're going to close it off right there. We're going to answer those questions next week. Now, you can read it and discern for yourself who it is. Yes, ma'am.